Hi, I'm Joe Roth. At New Jersey Sharing Network, we're committed to saving and enhancing people's lives through organ and tissue donation and informing people about our life-saving mission. That's why we're proud to support programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation and their partners in public television.
Funding for this edition of Caucus New Jersey has been provided by the Turrell Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Delta Dental of New Jersey. Everyone deserves a healthy smile. NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. New Jersey Sharing Network, dedicated to saving lives through organ and tissue donation. Wells Fargo. And by Englewood Health. Promotional support provided by Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey and by New Jersey Family Magazine and njfamily.com.
I'm Steve Adubato. I want to introduce you to our longtime friend, Dr. Arturo Brito, who is Executive Director of the Nicholson Foundation. Arturo, we are here at Morven for an important event, an important night, historic when it comes to dealing with ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Talk about it.
Well, it is a historic night. We see this as a launch of a new beginning for the state. As we were talking earlier, we have some very important people here, great people here that have come together and address ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, in the state of New Jersey. The truth is that in New Jersey, we need to do a better job of collecting information about ACEs, but we know that at least 1 in 4, and probably a little bit more than that, have experienced at least one ACE in their lifetime, and a number of those have experienced more than one ACE. And what that means is that their lifelong health, both physical and mental health, is impacted. And until we address them, first by preventing the problems, then by protecting people and providing buffering systems and support systems for them when they do experience these adverse experiences, we're not going to make a lot of headway with what we're trying to do with our healthcare systems. So this is why the Nicholson Foundation, the Burke Foundation, and the Turrell Fund have come together to invest in this. And while we're asking others to come along with us for this ride, for this journey, that we really believe this is the launch of something big and something new that's going to make New Jersey put us at the top of the country in how we address healthcare, how we address people's well-being, and it really does start with addressing these experiences.
What Dr. Brito is not saying is that the Nicholson Foundation, together with Turrell, has allowed us at the Caucus Educational Corporation, our partners in public broadcasting, to do a series called Right from the Start NJ. As we're speaking right now, you'll see the website on your screen. Dr. Brito is also a pediatrician, understands this not just because he's the head of a major foundation, but because you understand this clinically, you care deeply about children, and you see the impact.
Right. And it starts with understanding the science. You know, if you really look at it as a clinician and as a scientist, it really is fascinating, and we're going to hear Dr. Nadine Burke Harris speak later today, and she explains the science better than anybody about how those experiences early on in life in particular impact brain architecture in such a way that for the rest of a person's life, they're more likely to have health issues, not just mental health issues as one might predict or expect, but also what are traditionally called medical issues. They're really all medical issues, but things like heart disease, even some forms of cancer are now, scientists are finding, are connected to these experiences people have early on in life.
Dr. Brito, you talked to us in another interview about toxic stress.
Right.
Are we using different terms to talk about the same thing?
Yeah, they're related, Steve, but they're not exactly the same thing. So when we talked about toxic stress, you know, we're going to have stress in our lives, different kind of stress. And when we talked about it last time, I explained that when a child has stress early on in their life, if they don't have the right support system, right buffering system, that stress could become toxic. And then that's where and some of those stresses we're talking about are these ACEs that have been well studied for now, since 1998 when the original study came out, so really for more than 20 years. And that's the relationship between them. So when we say toxic stress, we mean It could be an adverse childhood experience that was never really addressed, or the child didn't have the right protective mechanisms around him or her.
You know, it's interesting, the Right from the Start NJ initiative that I mentioned, we're focusing on birth to 3,
Right.
even prenatal as well. These ACEs, these childhood experiences, these adverse childhood experiences, they occur during that period as well.
The ACEs can occur during different periods of
A 2-year-old,
a
one-year-old.
2-year-old, 1-year-old. But the important thing is, and what we talked about last time, you know, the earlier we can address them, the better off we're going to be.
Define address them.
Well, so for instance, let's say a child has lives in a household where the parents are separated or divorced, and there's a lot of domestic discord or dysfunction in that house. Well, without those parents and that child getting the support system from other relatives or from the community to really understand what that means, then that child is more likely to develop into an adult who has more health issues than the average. A child who has been maltreated, of course, you know, what we want to do, abused or neglected.
Talk about neglected.
Well, neglected children means children that aren't getting the interaction that they need, the stimulations, particularly perinatally, right from infancy, that they need. And that neglect can also, well, definitely impacts brain architecture in a way that, again, impacts lifelong health. So what we need to do there is make sure that every infant born in the state of New Jersey and every child growing up in the state of New Jersey has the opportunity for the right support systems, the right systems that stimulate their brain for optimal growth, for their mental health growth, as well as their physical growth, and the best likelihood of lifelong health that's a positive, and the least likelihood of having problems like heart disease and other emotional issues.
So the $2 million, the seed money, the
Right.
Nicholson Foundation and the Burke Foundation, that's going to attract other money, hopefully.
We hope so.
Right?
We
Other
hope so.
private money. Is there a role for state government here?
Absolutely, absolutely. We believe that for this to succeed, there has to be this true public-private partnership. And for us, we need the leadership, which we have with the First Lady and Commissioner Beyer, who's the Department of Children and Families Commissioner.
Oh, we'll be talking to her as well tonight.
Yeah, and she comes to the state of New Jersey with vast experience, and I'm sure she'll tell you about this, setting up programs in other states around ACEs and addressing them in states like Wisconsin. And we're learning from those states, but together, through this public-private partnership, we're going to make this New Jersey the #1 state that addresses ACEs in a way that will really help give the best chance for every single child and every single person living in the state of New Jersey.
That's everyone's responsibility, you're right.
Correct.
Dr. Brito, thank you for joining us here at Morven, but also for allowing us to do what we are doing with this initiative right from the start. NJR, the website, actually, to fully disclose, our website is underwritten by the Nicholson Foundation. So I want to thank you so much.
And I want to thank you, Steve, and we're proud to partner with you on that. We're so happy with that website. So appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Doctor.
Thank you.
To watch more Caucus New Jersey, find us online and follow us on social media.
We are honored to be joined all the way from San Francisco, a compelling author, a pediatrician, an entrepreneur, someone who's making a huge difference in the lives of so many children across this country. She is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, and the author of a compelling book called The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity. Good to see you, Doctor.
It's very nice to meet you. Thank you.
Doctor, let me ask you this book, your message. You gave a TED Talk back in, it was released in 15? Mm-hmm. You got a lot of reaction in response to it. You wrote this book about adverse childhood trauma, if you will. Mm-hmm. What have you seen as a pediatrician?
I've seen a lot. I've seen, the reason I wrote the book is because for many children, kids were being referred to me saying, you know, please, I think they've got ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He needs Ritalin. Can you put him on some medicine? And as a doctor, when I investigated how early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children, what I found was that for most of the kids I was seeing, Ritalin actually wasn't the right prescription. And it was really a result of their body's normal reaction to the abnormal experiences that they were dealing with. Things like domestic violence or having a parent who's mentally ill or substance dependent, these things that are common, but they are really harmful for kids' development and well-being.
Short and long term for these children.
Yes, that's absolutely
Talk about
right.
that, because some of your colleagues have talked about, and they kept referring to your keynote and how you would be the one to be able to explain this, but short term, there's obvious, well, I shouldn't say obvious, there are certain effects, but long term, you're talking about heart disease, you're talking about cancer, and that was shocking to me that there's a correlation. There is.
Yeah, so understanding that when we talk about the effects of early adversity, I think for a lot of us it makes common sense that if you have a rough childhood, you may be more likely to, drink and smoke or have, end up with depression or other mental health or behavioral conditions. I think the thing about this research from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente showing that high levels of adverse childhood experiences can double your risk for heart disease or stroke or dramatically increase your risk for Alzheimer's, right? That for a lot of folks was like, what? That's not about bad behavior. That is, what is that about? And for me as a doctor, it has been a fascinating journey of uncovering how it is that early adversity leads to increased risk of all these different health problems.
We are, with our production company, doing a series called Right from the Start, and it's funded by Nicholson and the Turrell Fund and some others. 0 to 3. What we're talking about, these traumatic experiences, this toxic stress, if you will, 0 to 3 as well. Happens to those children, no?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of people think that, my child was too little. He doesn't remember, and therefore it probably didn't affect him. And what we now know is that those earliest years, the 0 to 3 time period, is a time of what we call critical and sensitive periods in brain development where these harmful experiences can have an even greater impact on long-term health and development.
During that period?
During that period, yes, that's right. And so helping kids have a healthy start right from the beginning is absolutely critical in preventing these long-term effects. In fact, what all of the science is showing us now is that early intervention improves outcomes. So when we start from the very beginning, right, and really that means starting with parents, raising awareness, having this conversation that having adversity in childhood can lead to an overactive stress response, right? What we call the toxic stress response. And that can lead to lots of health problems down the line. But you don't have to hand down your adversity to your kids. There's actually a tremendous amount of healing that can happen. And that's what I have dedicated my professional life to, and our organization, the Center for Youth Wellness, is really working on raising national awareness and helping clinicians have tools to be able to address toxic stress in children.
To what degree is this a national crisis?
Oh, this is a public health crisis. Across the United States, we're talking about almost 35 million children at risk for toxic stress.
35 million.
That's right.
I want to get the numbers right. I know there's a report that's coming out next month with more details on this. Is it 1 out of 4, or is it close to half? I mean, how many are we talking about?
So when we're talking about individuals who have been exposed to at least one adverse childhood experience, we're talking about 2/3 of adults.
2/3 of adults.
2/3 of adults. And when we're talking about the number of folks who have been exposed to 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, which is really this very high threshold where we see double the risk for heart disease, 2.5 times the risk of stroke, triple the risk of chronic lung disease, that's 1 in 8 Americans. So this is not, some small problem that only happens in certain folks or in certain communities. In fact, this research, when it was originally done by the CDC, was done in a middle-class community, 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated.
It's so interesting, by the way, the reference is obviously, if you're not following, to the Centers for Disease Control. What I'm curious about is, say you're talking about our national political discourse, discussion of leaders in our nation. I might have missed this, but I've been doing this for a few years. I've never heard one major political figure talk in detail about any of this. Is it something they don't know about?
Well, more and more, I think our political leadership is being awakened to this issue. In this June, actually, I was invited and gave testimony at a congressional hearing about the issue of toxic stress when the issue of separating kids from their caregivers at the border was
as an immigration policy, right?
Exactly.
This is part of, that is what you were, another example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so what the science shows us, right, is that when stressful or traumatic things happen and they activate a child's stress response, the way that we buffer the child's stress response is with safe, stable, and nurturing caregiving relationship. Essentially having a loving parent or caregiver or relative to be able to do that. So when we have kids who have gone through adversity, who are coming to our country as refugees because of the trauma that they're leaving, and then we set a policy of separating them from their caregivers, we're literally putting their health at risk. And in fact, what we saw was that individuals who were in the Japanese internment camps had double the rate for heart disease.
During World War II?
Yes, that's right.
Double the rate.
Double the rate of heart disease. And so at this point, as a nation, we have to understand that once we know this science, we can't unknow it. And we must use it to inform our policies. And when we have policies that knowingly inflict physical harm, right, by separating children who are at the peak of vulnerability from their caregivers, that can lead to long-term medical risk, for me, it was critical to be able to speak out at the Senate hearing.
Doctor, I want to thank you for joining us here in New Jersey. From San Francisco, your message is powerful nationally. It'll be very much part of our Right from the Start NJ initiative, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
To see more Caucus New Jersey with Steve Adubato programs, visit us online at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD. And follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
We're honored to be joined by one of the key people who've helped put this together, and one of the leaders here, James Burke, President and Chairman of the Burke Foundation. Good to see you, James.
Great to see you, Steve.
For those who do not know what the Burke Foundation is, please share.
So my father, who was chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson from 1976 to 1989, right when he retired, he started the Burke Foundation, which was children and health, really, was the main focus. And it is only recently that we have sort of honed in on this childhood adversity issue as something that we think is a health crisis, frankly.
So tonight, it's interesting. There are a couple things happening that make this night significant. First of all, there's a $2 million fund that's being established. The first $2 million comes from your foundation and from the Nicholson Foundation. $2 million to do what?
Well, it's seed money. So we are going to try to
attract more money.
To attract more money from tonight at this event that we're having. There's going to be business leaders, there's going to be philanthropists, foundations. We're trying to create a coalition around healing and stopping the adverse childhood experiences and the trauma and the toxic stress that comes with that. Because there's proof that later down the road, there's negative outcomes from that we could solve for. And
excuse me for interrupting, Jim.
Sure.
The term ACE is, adverse childhood experiences. There's a report that's coming out. We are taping, in fact, November. The report will come out very soon formally, and there'll be some highlights of the report tonight. What are we talking about when we talk about adverse childhood experiences?
So I became aware of this through Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who's going to be our
We'll be talking to
keynote
her as
speaker.
well.
Yeah,
Wrote a compelling book on the subject.
The Deepest Well. She's just incredible. And basically, she's put together a test that is 10 questions that teases out, did you have adverse childhood experiences or traumatic events in your childhood? And if you have say 4 or more, that can lead to very negative health outcomes, including higher rates of cancer and heart disease and high blood pressure and all sorts of things. So again, for us, we're early childhood funders, and we think that if we can catch them early, we can solve for those things later in life as adults and get more positive outcomes.
You know, it's interesting. I told you before we got on the air that we're involved in an initiative that the Turrell Fund, one of the key organizers tonight, is helping to fund. It's called Right from the Start, NJ, 0 to 3, birth to 3.
Yeah.
These adverse childhood effects that we're talking about, they also can happen birth to 3.
Absolutely. If you have a parent who has substance abuse problems, if there's child abuse, if there's violence in the family, these kinds of things are create toxic stress, create trauma in a child, and those can have adverse effects later on in life. So that's exactly right.
Devil's advocate, someone says, that's not my kid. I treat my kid, I treat our children fine, and so I feel terrible for these other children, but it's not, quote unquote, my business. It is, isn't it?
I think it's everybody's business.
That's right.
Let's just look at it from an economic standpoint, right? A lot of those kids end up in the emergency room, and we're paying for all of that health care that happens later in life. So we feel like there's lots of reasons and a moral imperative, frankly, to help take care of these kids. So I actually have had a couple of aces in my life, but I've been lucky enough to be able to have people who are supportive of me. I've had therapists, I've had family, I've had the supports around me to heal from those things, and actually it's given me certain kinds of strength, and we feel that if we can offer those to the people that don't have those advantages, we think we can make a real difference.
It's so interesting because the research we've read so far is that, the numbers, is it 1 in 4? 1 in 4 children?
Yeah, 1 in 4 children, exactly.
So I'm thinking about this. You were so candid in what you just shared, and as I looked at the list, I thought, I recognize. But I've had help, I've had support, and I appreciate what you said about yourself, but I think to myself, a significant percentage, a significant number, and we're talking about numbers, talking about real kids, do not have that.
That's exactly right.
And what happens?
Well, those adverse experiences lead to health problems later on in life, cancer rates and higher rates of heart disease. Heart disease is actually the #1 thing that comes from those ACEs. Isn't that
from toxic stress?
Yes, because your cortisol levels, and I didn't know this word until we started doing the work. So when you get into a stressful situation, you have a hormone called cortisone.
Is that the fight or flight thing?
Fight or flight response. And so that lifts up. But if you've had a number of these sort of traumatic events, you live your life in that heightened state instead of regulating and getting calm and coming down. You need that to some degree.
Sure.
But you don't want to live up there, because that kind of stress, as you can imagine, leads to high blood pressure, leads to asthma, leads to
not to mention the mental health issues as well.
That's part of it as well. But we're really focusing on the health aspect. You need mental health professionals to help those kids get the healing that they need. But what we think is so powerful about this issue is that there are these health outcomes that we think we can make a real impact on.
But what makes you optimistic that we're going to make a real difference?
I'm optimistic because the data tells me so. So Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, she'll speak to this a little bit, but the work that she's done has really shown that the outcomes can be very, very positive if we address the adverse childhood experiences, both from an economic standpoint and a health standpoint. So that's what makes me optimistic. We think, again, if you get them early, you can solve for all of these things later in life, and that's a good thing, I think.
And finally, for the Burke Foundation to be doing this, what's that like?
I'm thrilled. So how grateful can I be that I get to write checks because my father happened to work at Johnson & Johnson and make money, and I'm lucky enough to run this foundation and do good things. It's a dream job. It's fantastic.
By the way, the other part of your life, other than being the CEO here, is you know a little bit about the business that we're in right now. You're an award-winning
certainly do.
film producer, filmmaker. Real quick, was that you got into that immediately, or
When I got out of college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, although I loved acting. So I started acting, and then I moved to Los Angeles with stars in my eyes, and eventually got into producing and directing, and now I make films. I'm working in the foundation, but I still make films. I sort of have a small niche of lower budget movies with name actors. So I do Sundance and Toronto and Cannes Film Festival kind of movies.
I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to us. This event, this night, the people who are gathering, all doing something important to make a difference for too many children who are suffering unnecessarily. Thank you, James.
You're great. Thanks,
Appreciate
Steve.
it.
The preceding program has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 30 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of Caucus New Jersey has been provided by the Turrell Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Delta Dental of New Jersey, NJIT, New Jersey Sharing Network, Wells Fargo, and by Englewood Health. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.
It feels like I've opened my eyes again, and the color